I always tell you stories about clever heists that were shown on the channel. But today's theft story is the complete opposite. It's one of the dumbest robberies you'll ever come across, and the reason is that the perpetrators were a group of teenagers who learned to steal from movies and TV shows. These teens were tempted by greed and the desire for quick wealth, leading them down a much harder path than they ever imagined. Even though they spent a long time, months even, planning the operation, when it came time to execute it, they faced surprises they didn't see coming. Watch the story and enjoy. Peace be upon you. This is Shams Al-Din, and today's story is a real one. But I didn't use any pictures or videos for illustration, so you can just put on your headphones and enjoy the story while doing whatever else you want. Let me know if you prefer audio stories or visual ones, so I can focus on one type for this channel, because I honestly still don't know what you all like better, audio or visual stories. So, give me your opinion in the comments. Without further ado, let's get started. Our story begins in 2003, specifically in the city of Lexington, located in the state of Kentucky. The story starts with a young man named Spencer Reinhard, who was 18 years old at the time, just like any guy in the late stages of adolescence. Spencer had finished school and enrolled in a university called Transylvania, which is located in the same city, Lexington. This university specialized in the arts, meaning that students who enrolled there usually wanted to become artists or painters or study art history and the literary aspects related to art. Naturally, you'd expect someone with these interests to be quiet, polite, kind, and maybe a bit of a loner. You wouldn't expect someone who likes trouble or does reckless things. And really, that was generally Spencer's nature. He was someone who liked to think about his life, and he had some worries and mental stress about his ambitions, his future, where he was heading in life, and so on. Overall, he was a calm person who didn't like stepping outside of his comfort zone. But Spencer had a friend named Warren Lipka, who was around the same age. Warren was the complete opposite of Spencer. He was wild and loved doing bold, adventurous things. He always went against the grain, and his thoughts were unconventional. He liked doing things that most people saw as wrong. Even though he didn't see himself as a troublemaker, he saw himself as a free spirit who loved living life on the edge. I mean, it's kind of crazy how these two became friends, considering their personalities were so different. They met in school and remained friends, even after graduating and going to different colleges. A lot of the time, Warren would drag Spencer into things. For instance, sometimes Warren would get the idea to rob a store or a warehouse, not because he needed to, but just for fun. One time, Warren broke into a food storage next to a restaurant and stole some meat. He made Spencer help him. When the restaurant owner saw them, he called the police immediately and came out holding a gun. If the guy had been reckless, he could have shot them. This is just one example of the situations Warren got Spencer into, and it happened more than once. But you could say that maybe deep down, Spencer kind of liked these adventures, which is why he stayed friends with Warren all these years, even though his parents were against their friendship. Personally, I think opposites attract. Calm personalities are drawn to adventurous ones to break the monotony and pull them out of their safe zones. At least that's how I see it. Anyway, time passed, and as we mentioned, Spencer enrolled at the Art University Transylvania that we talked about at the beginning of the story. During orientation week, which is the first week for new students, the librarian gave the students a tour of the university's facilities, including the university library. At the end of the tour, she took them to the special section or room in the library. This room had some valuable art and historical books, and it was a locked room with doors that were usually kept locked. Anyone or any group wanting to enter this room needed to make an appointment, and a library staff member had to be with them. The librarian took the new students into this section, with Spencer among them, and started explaining the place and introducing them to the books inside. The most important book in this room was titled Birds of America by an artist named Audubon. The book is quite large and consists of pages that are artistic drawings this artist made in the 19th century, with each picture representing birds from America. This book is the most valuable piece of artwork the university owns. When the students asked the librarian about the value of the book, she replied that they generally don't discuss the monetary value of their books because, to them, they are priceless. However, this book is considered one of the most valuable in the world, and if it were to be sold today, it wouldn't go for less than $12 million. Spencer was fascinated by this book from the beginning, and when he heard its value, he became even more amazed, staring at it through the glass case as if he were hypnotized. This book stuck in Spencer's mind and didn't leave his thoughts. When he met up with his friend Warren, the first thing he did was tell him about this book. Warren, of course, didn't believe it at first and said to Spencer, "Can you really believe a book could be worth $12 million?" Spencer replied, "Well, it's more a collection of artwork than just a book, and that's what gives it its value." Warren asked, "And this book is just sitting on a shelf without any guards or security?" Spencer responded, "No, it's in a special section, a room separated from the rest of the library with locked doors, and no one can enter unless the librarian or one of her staff is present." At that point, Warren took a moment to think. Spencer asked him, "What are you thinking about?" Warren replied, "You know what I'm thinking. You're the one who told me about this book, and you know where my mind is going. You're playing the role of the fisherman, and I'm like the fish that can't resist the bait." Warren was the type of person who, once he had an idea, found it hard to let go of it. The very next day, he started looking up how to pull off a robbery online, writing down notes and steps he found on different websites. He learned, for instance, that he needed to understand the security measures, know the staff working there, and familiarize himself with the entrances and exits. He learned all of this from the internet. The idea kept growing in his mind, and he even tried convincing Spencer about it. But Spencer would say he was crazy, and that this wasn't his goal when he told him about the book. Warren, however, kept pressing and pushing him, even going to Spencer's workplace to persuade him. In the end, after many attempts, Spencer gave in and said, "All right, I'm with you." Of course, neither of them had any real experience in pulling off a heist. Sure, Warren had stolen from small stores and warehouses before, but he'd never done anything on this level. So, they sat down and watched movies and TV shows about heists to learn from them. Can you imagine? Their learning sources were the internet and movies. The first thing they learned was that they needed to study the place from every angle. They kept an eye on the library, watching the staff come and go, noting their working hours, who came in the morning, who worked in the evening, and all the little details. The second step was getting familiar with the entrances, exits, and the layout of the library. What Spencer did was simple. From his regular visits to the library, he started drawing out all the rooms, halls, sections, entrances, and exits in detail. He even entered the special room with the book multiple times to examine it from the inside. In the end, he managed to create a complete map of the place, showing the route they'd take if they decided to carry out the heist. The map showed they'd enter through the main door, turn right, go up the stairs to the second floor, and then enter the special room with the book. After stealing the book, there was a staff-only elevator in the back they could use to escape. This was their initial plan. But even after reaching this stage, Spencer was still hesitant. He asked Warren, "Even if we steal the book, how are we going to sell it? This isn't just some expensive item anyone on the street can buy." Warren replied, "Don't worry, I'll handle that. I'll find a buyer." Being the rebellious guy he was, Warren had some shady contacts from the underground world. Sometimes he needed fake IDs, and he had a regular forger he worked with. So he went to this forger and asked, "If I have something valuable, rare, and with artistic or historical significance, how can I find people who'll buy it? After asking Warren some questions, the forger gave him the contact info of someone he could talk to. This person wasn't the one who would buy the book, but they knew people who bought art pieces on the black market. Warren got in touch with this person, and they pointed him to someone else in Europe, specifically in the Netherlands. This guy in the Netherlands didn't even have a phone number. The only way to contact him was by email. Warren and Spencer sent this guy an email, asking for details on how they could sell stolen art pieces. So this guy replied that he doesn't give any details through email and didn't provide any specifics. He wrote at the end of the message that they were welcome to visit him in the Netherlands. In the end, Spencer helped Warren book just one ticket, and Warren was the one who would travel alone to the Netherlands. Without hesitation, Warren agreed, and in about 2 months, he gathered some money and managed to buy a plane ticket to the Netherlands. Once he had enough, he made the trip. Spencer dropped him off at the airport, and Warren continued on his own. Warren arrived in the Netherlands and had agreed to meet the mysterious guy, or what seemed like a dealer, at a restaurant. But when Warren got to the restaurant, there were 2 people waiting, not just one. They started talking about the book. By the way, there was more than one valuable book in the special room at the library, and the book with the birds wasn't the only one. Spencer and Warren had figured that out through their surveillance and research about the library. Warren had even prepared a list with the names of the valuable books in that special room, and gave this list to the Dutch guys to evaluate. But it seemed there was a bit of a misunderstanding, because the Dutch guys thought Warren actually had the books with him and was there to sell them. But all Warren did was hand them a list of names of the books, and you could see the disappointment on their faces. Warren explained that the books would be in his possession soon, but right now, he was just trying to find a buyer. One of the Dutchmen, who seemed to be the dealer, told him, "These books are indeed valuable, and we're willing to pay a fair price, but you need to have proof of ownership." Warren was confused and asked, "What kind of proof are you talking about?" The Dutch dealer responded, "We buy art pieces from various sources without asking where they came from. But the important thing is that there are papers proving the pieces are authentic. These papers are usually issued by auction experts." To clarify, what this guy meant was that the auctions where art is sold are overseen by famous auction houses. These houses have experts who can evaluate the pieces and confirm their authenticity and historical value. Warren asked the Dutch dealer, "If I bring you the books with proof, will you buy them?" The dealer replied, "Yes, we will buy them." So Warren asked, "And how much are you going to pay me for these books?" The dealer said, "I'll pay you 30 to 40% of the appraised value given by the auction house." Naturally, Warren was thrilled at this because 30 to 40% of the original value would be a respectable amount. If they could get the Birds of America book along with another book from the special room, they could end up with more than $10 million. After that, Warren returned to the US, met up with Spencer, and told him everything that happened. But Spencer remained hesitant, just like before, and Warren needed to push him to make a decision. That's when Warren realized they would need an additional member on the team because Spencer alone wouldn't be enough to pull this off, especially since Spencer was always so unsure. Warren told Spencer he would look for someone new to join them, and Spencer agreed, saying, "All right, but make sure you choose someone you trust." Warren already had someone specific in mind. This person had been a close friend of his in the past, but they had drifted apart and hadn't spoken in a while. The guy's name was Eric Borsuk, and he was about the same age as them. Eric was studying accounting at a university in their same city, which was Lexington. Warren knew that Eric had a sharp, calculated mind and that his perspective would help them execute the plan. So Warren reached out to Eric and they quickly got down to business. Warren told him, "I've got a job for you. It may not be legal, and we might run into some trouble if we're not careful, but at the same time, it could make us a fortune we couldn't even dream of." Eric asked, "And what's this job?" Warren said, "First thing, I want to know, are you in or not?" Eric replied, "How can I decide if I'm in or not when I don't even know what the job is?" Warren said, "At least I want to know if you're willing to do something illegal for a good payout." Eric thought for a moment and said, "All right, count me in. Tell me the story." Warren explained everything to him from start to finish, and in the end, Eric agreed to join them. One of the reasons Eric might have been encouraged to get involved was his desire to rekindle his friendship with Warren. They used to be really close, but had drifted apart for a while. Eric felt like this was a good opportunity to get close to Warren again. Now the team was made up of 3 members, Spencer, Warren, and Eric. The next night, the 3 of them drove over to check out the library from the outside. Eric asked, "Are there cameras inside the special room?" Spencer answered, "From what I've found, there aren't any cameras inside the room, but there are motion sensors, and those could set off the alarm." They were assuming they'd do the heist at night when the library was closed. But Eric, the new guy with the strategic mind, immediately said, "We won't be able to do this at night." Warren asked, "Why?" Eric replied, "At night, the alarms will be activated, and it'll be impossible to get into the building and the room, especially with the sensors, without being detected. We need to figure out how to do it during the day when the alarms are off." Warren immediately agreed, saying, "I knew I didn't choose you for nothing. But how can we pull it off during the day when people are around?" To find an answer to that question, the 3 of them met up at Spencer's house. Since Spencer was an artist, he made a model of the special room in the library. They started discussing and imagining how they'd carry out the plan. Their main target was the bird book, which was the most valuable book there. But there were also other valuable books they'd try to grab. The plan to get into the room was simple. They would schedule an appointment with the library to visit the room. This was doable, especially for people working in the arts field. They could pretend to be professors, writers, or even students and request an appointment. But the biggest problem would be the librarian, who would be in the room with them during the visit, since one of the conditions for entering the room was that the librarian had to be present with anyone or any group visiting, and she wouldn't leave them alone. The librarian was the biggest obstacle they had to deal with somehow. They started imagining how the plan would go. They'd enter the room, and then one of them might use a taser to knock the librarian unconscious. After that, they'd immediately start grabbing the smaller books, and finally, they'd go for the big prize, the bird book, wrapping it up in a large piece of fabric. Once they had their loot, there was an elevator in the back of the room meant for staff use that they could take down to the basement. But to use the elevator, they'd need a special key card, and that card was likely with the librarian. They'd take the card, go down the elevator from the second floor to the basement, and from there, they could exit through the emergency exit. They knew all these entrances and exits because of the research they had done on the library, the time they spent studying the building and drawing up its layout. The plan was good so far, but Eric immediately noticed a flaw, which was that they didn't have enough people. They would need at least one person to keep watch outside the room, 2 people inside to carry out the heist, and a 4th person to be the getaway driver right after they left with the books. This is where the 4th member of the team came in, Chaz Allen. Chaz was around their age. He was one of Warren's acquaintances, and Eric knew him from school. Chaz came from a wealthy family, meaning he had money, so they decided to bring him in to help fund the operation, and he'd also be their getaway driver. Their plan was to buy a car with cash using a fake ID so it would be hard to trace after the heist. Warren and Eric went to Chaz and pitched the idea to him. Chaz's first reaction was to call them crazy, saying, "Are you serious? You want to steal books?" Warren explained the situation more, walked him through all the details, and told him they had everything planned out, and that their final cut could be over $10 million. All he had to do was give them some cash to buy a cheap used car and be their driver. Chaz was hesitant at first, but he quickly got on board and joined the team. That's how the four members were complete: Spencer, Warren, Eric, and Chaz, all around 18 to 19 years old. The four of them met at Warren's house and started discussing the plan in detail. The first thing they decided was that they would wear disguises, and this would be Spencer's responsibility. Since he was the artist, he would figure out what type of disguise they'd wear, and he'd be in charge of providing the clothes and tools for that part of the plan. Eric's job was to find a suitable car and buy it, something cheap and low profile that wouldn't draw attention. He'd buy it with cash using a fake ID so no one could trace them. Chaz, the driver, had to practice driving the quickest route that would take them from the library to the drop-off point where they'd hide after the heist. He had to practice every day on this street or road and memorize it like the back of his hand. That was his task. As for Warren, his job was to get documents for the books from one of the auction houses. He'd contact a well-known auction house in New York and get an appointment from them to have the books appraised and receive proof of authenticity, which was one of the key requirements from the Dutch buyer who'd be purchasing the books from them. The appointment with the auction house would be scheduled for the weekend after the heist. The idea was that they'd get an appraisal and documentation from the auction house without getting caught. It was crucial that the job be done as quickly as possible before word got out. They contacted the auction house under the pretense that Warren was the relative of a wealthy person, and this wealthy relative wanted to get some items and historical artifacts appraised. Warren wrote them saying he wanted to set up an appointment to evaluate some of these items, and scheduled it for the weekend right after the heist. As for the date of the heist itself, Warren told his friends that he had also contacted the library by email and booked an appointment to visit the special room, which was where the books were kept. They chose the day right before the end of the semester, which would be 8 days from now. All three of his friends told him they had exams that day, to which Warren said, "Great! No one will suspect a bunch of students with exams to be pulling off a heist that same day." This way, they'd keep suspicion off themselves, and at the same time, the library would be nearly empty because students would be busy with exams. Their idea was to carry out the robbery and then go to their exams the same day, so no one would suspect them. And that's how they set the date for the job, with only a few details left to finalize. The first detail was about the disguises. Naturally, Spencer was in charge of that since he was the artist, and he chose that they would dress up as old men. The other three were surprised and asked, "Why old men?" Spencer answered, "Because old people attract the least attention, and no one focuses on them or is scared of them." So they all agreed on this type of disguise. The next detail was how to deal with the librarian. They had agreed that they'd use a stun gun to knock her out, but this was the hardest part of the job because it meant attacking an innocent elderly woman. None of the four felt comfortable with this, and Spencer, Eric, and Chaz flat out refused to be involved in that part. They put all the responsibility on Warren, saying, "You're the one leading this, so you gotta handle it." Warren suggested that they decide by drawing straws or something fair, but they stood firm in their refusal. In the end, each of them said they'd rather call off the job than take part in dealing with the librarian. Warren tried to convince them and ease their worries, saying, "After the job, we'll make it up to her. We'll send her a big bouquet of flowers and tens of thousands of dollars. and she'll forget all about it. But no one was convinced. In the end, Warren realized he'd have to take on that role himself, so he said, "Since you're all too cowardly, I'll be the brave one and do it." Warren was the most determined to see the plan through and was willing to do whatever it took to make it happen. Finally, the day came. It was Thursday, December 16th, 2004. Our four friends gathered their gear on the table and went over their checklist to make sure everything was ready. After they were sure, the next step was for Chaz to steal some random license plates. The key thing was that these plates couldn't be traced back to them. After that, each of the four began putting on the disguises Spencer had prepared for them. Wigs, hair dye, makeup, fake beards and mustaches, and even colored contact lenses. They looked a little funny, but the disguises were decent, not bad. Warren and Spencer were the first to finish getting ready, and then Chaz arrived with the car right on time after switching the plates. Of course, they all piled into the car, and Spencer, as usual, was extremely nervous. He was always the weakest link among them. After that, they picked up Eric, who got into the car immediately, and the four of them drove toward the library. When they arrived, they all got out of the car, even Chaz, who was supposed to be the getaway driver. He got out to make sure everything was good before heading back to the car. The four of them walked into the library and split up. The plan was for Warren and Eric to break into the room, while Spencer would act as the lookout outside, and Chaz, as we mentioned, would stay in the car as the driver. Even though the disguises were supposed to make them blend in and avoid attention, their appearance was strange and actually attracted stares. This was teenage thinking at its finest. They watched a movie and said, "Let's put on disguises and pull off a heist." Literally, they copied the disguise idea from a film. Anyway, according to the plan, Warren was supposed to head to the room first. He was supposed to deal with the librarian and then call Eric in to help steal the books. Afterward, the two of them would escape using the employee elevator inside the room, which, as we mentioned, required a card to operate, likely in the possession of the librarian. Warren went up the stairs to the second floor, heading toward the room. Of course, he had already booked an appointment, as we said. But the unexpected surprise was that inside the room, in addition to the librarian, there were 3 other library staff members having a small meeting. This was something they hadn't planned for at all. Immediately, Warren came back down the stairs and told his friends that things had gotten complicated and that there were 4 library staff members in the room. The 4 friends got nervous, each one looking at the other in confusion. Something like this wasn't in their plan at all. Spencer, who was always hesitant, said, "Well, we haven't done anything yet. We can just leave and forget the whole thing." But Chaz suggested, "Or we could wait. They're not going to stay in that room all day." Warren asked, "Who's willing to wait?" Spencer was the first to back out, saying, "I'm leaving." Eric followed him, and naturally Chaz and Warren followed too, since they couldn't do the job with just the 2 of them. Spencer felt an immense sense of relief as he walked out of the library, like he'd dodged the biggest disaster of his life. He wondered why he even got involved with them in the first place. It was probably just bad company. Warren, of course, was the most upset and frustrated with how things had gone. Afterward, Chaz said, "Maybe this was for the best. We probably avoided a disaster." Warren snapped back, "You're the last person who should be talking, you coward!" Then Warren asked Chaz to stop at a store so he could make a call. When Warren returned to the car, he told his friends, "I just called the library and they told me there are no appointments booked for tomorrow, so I booked us a new one at 11 a.m. We'll go back and do the job again." Chaz and Eric agreed, while Spencer remained hesitant, though it seemed like he was just following the group. They all went home, planning to meet up later that night to go over the details again. Later that night, before their meeting, Spencer confronted Warren and said, "That's it. I don't want to be part of this anymore. I'm backing out." But Warren, as usual, knew how to convince him. He said, "If you back out now, you'll never do anything bigger than this in your life. You've got to be smart and take advantage of this opportunity. You won't get a chance like this again, and trust me, you'll regret it if you leave." When Warren saw that Spencer wasn't fully convinced this time, he said, "Look, I'll reduce your role in the job. All you have to do is come and be the lookout outside. You won't even need to go into the library." Spencer, still hesitant, finally agreed, saying, "All right, fine." About an hour later, the four of them gathered at Warren's place to go over the plan again. The first thing they agreed on was that they wouldn't use the old man disguises again since, contrary to their expectations, it actually drew attention to them. But they were going to wear nice clothes, suits to look sharp. Chaz would be the driver as usual, and Spencer would be the lookout. But he'd stay outside the library, basically useless, just there for numbers. Warren and Eric were the ones going into the room to steal the books. Warren would go to the room first, and his main job was to deal with the librarian. He'd shock her with a stun gun to knock her out, then call Eric to help steal the books and carry them out. They'd leave through the employee elevator in the back room, which needed the librarian's key card. While discussing these details, Eric wanted to make sure Warren was really going to handle the librarian. He asked, "Are you sure you're not going to get me caught up with the librarian? If you do, we're out." Warren replied, "Dude, don't worry. Like I said, I'll handle the librarian. Don't stress. I won't call you until I've taken care of her." The next morning, on the day of the job, Friday, December 17th, 2004, the four of them arrived at the library in their car. Spencer, acting as the lookout, climbed onto the roof of a nearby building, while Chaz, the driver, stayed in the car. Warren and Eric went inside the library. Eric sat on one of the chairs, while Warren headed up to the second floor towards the room. The librarian was alone this time, waiting for him since he'd made an appointment. When he got there, she opened the door and welcomed him. His eyes immediately locked onto the bird book, the one that was supposed to make him a millionaire. This was when Warren was supposed to knock out the librarian and deal with her. Eric was downstairs, on edge, when suddenly his phone rang. Warren was on the other end. "Come on up, I'm done. I dealt with the librarian," Warren said. So Eric went up to the second floor and headed to the room. But when he got there, the librarian was still there, completely conscious. Warren had lied. He hadn't been able to deal with the librarian himself. Warren was terrified, while Eric was nervous and ready to bail. He'd told Warren earlier, "If you get me caught up with the librarian, we're bailing on this." But quickly, Warren told the librarian his friend had arrived, and she got up to open the door. Eric found himself almost forced into the situation. Whenever anyone entered the room, the librarian would take their name and record the time. As she started writing down Eric's name, Warren suddenly attacked her from behind with the stun gun. Chaos erupted. The librarian didn't lose consciousness from the shock. Instead, she started screaming in a broken, pained voice, saying, "You're hurting me! You're hurting me!" Imagine, this was a woman the same age as their mothers, and they were treating her like this. Quickly, Warren tied her up, apologizing the whole time, saying they only wanted the books and didn't want to hurt her. He was trying to calm her down, but at the same time, he threatened her, saying, "If you don't stay quiet, the pain will get worse." Eric was freaked out by the whole scene, but he knew they'd crossed a point of no return. Warren asked us to tie her legs so she wouldn't move. Eric tried to put on his gloves so he wouldn't leave fingerprints, but he was so nervous he couldn't put them on right. Even Warren had gloves on, but they kept slipping because of all the movement. Looks like the gloves they bought were cheap, and now their prints were everywhere. Warren put tape over the librarian's mouth to keep her quiet, while Eric tied her legs. The poor lady was still moaning and saying, "Have mercy. Don't tie me up. I can't take it." After that, they started looking for the keys to open the drawers and the glass case that held the bird book, but they searched all over the room and couldn't find them. They were super tense and their minds were racing. Adrenaline was at an all-time high. Eventually, Warren realized the keys were probably on the librarian, and after searching her, he found the keys on a chain around her neck. He then dragged her away from the door while she was still groaning and crying. Meanwhile, Eric grabbed a small, valuable book and stuffed it into his bag. They then used the key to open the glass case, spread out a big cloth, and laid the bird book on it. There were also drawers with huge books on the same table, so they opened one of the drawers and took another book, placing it on top of the first one. Warren wanted to take more of the big books, but Eric said, "Are you crazy? We can barely carry these two." Warren was like, "Fine, fine," and gave up immediately. There was also another valuable book in the room, Darwin's book, which was the second most important one after the bird book. So they quickly smashed the glass case protecting it, grabbed it, and put it in the bag. They grabbed their bags fast, carrying the two large books, and headed for the back elevator. It was the employees' elevator, and they used the librarian's card to operate it. But in their panic, Eric accidentally pressed the button for the first floor instead of the basement, so the elevator opened on the first floor. When the door opened, they tried to hide in the corners of the elevator, but some students noticed them, and even one of the library staff saw them. Warren and Eric waited until the elevator door closed again, then went down to the basement. But down there, they had a nasty surprise. The basement wasn't what they expected. They thought there'd be an emergency exit to escape the building, but the place was sealed off with no way out. This was a major screw-up in their planning because they hadn't checked if there was an actual emergency exit. Warren and Eric had no choice but to go back to the first floor and exit through the emergency door by the elevator. They rushed up to the first floor, carrying the books. All eyes were on them, and the staff member who'd been sitting at the desk immediately noticed them and got up. Warren and Eric were trying to move as fast as possible. But as they were going down the stairs, the huge books slipped out of their hands. Warren wanted to go back and grab the books, but Eric yelled at him, "Leave them! It's over! We're in escape mode now! Forget the loot!" The staff member was chasing them. Warren and Eric ran out of the emergency exit, and Chaz saw them and started the car. Once they jumped in, they sped off. Chaz, confused, asked, "Where are the books?" Eric responded, "We couldn't get them. We had to bail because there was no way out." Chaz was like, "So after all this, we got nothing?" And they all started yelling at each other. Warren then said, calm down. I've got Darwin's book. That's the book we broke the glass case for. It's the second most valuable book in the room after the bird book, and it could be worth over $1 million. Warren told them, "Relax, we at least got something." And Eric had also grabbed a valuable book. Even though it wasn't as valuable as the ones they dropped, it could still fetch $500,000 or more. At least these two books could save them from a complete disaster. Warren and Eric quickly changed clothes in the car, and Chaz decided to drop them off in some random spot far from the drop-off point or their houses. He figured if the cops started looking for them, they'd be looking for a car with 3 guys. Warren and Eric got out of the car, and Chaz took off immediately. Spencer, meanwhile, got down from the rooftop and went home. Chaz drove to a distant location to ditch the car. Warren and Eric made it back home, and it didn't take long before the news spread across the local channels. The cops were looking for them, but all the information they had was their descriptions, the car's make, color, and its plates. Their descriptions wouldn't help much in finding them, and Chaz got rid of the car, so there's no way they'd find it. They bought it in cash with a fake ID, and the plates on it were stolen, so the cops literally had nothing. Of course, the news spreading locally or statewide didn't mean it was national yet, which was important because they wanted to get the books authenticated at the auction house in New York. So it was crucial to get the appraisal done quickly before the news hit New York or spread nationwide. If you remember, their first failed attempt was on Thursday when they disguised themselves as old men, and they were supposed to go to the auction house the next day, Friday. But they had to do the heist on Friday, and Saturday was the weekend, so the auction house didn't open until Monday. On Monday, December 20th, 2004, all 4 headed to the auction house in New York. Warren and Spencer were the ones who went in, dressed up all fancy to match the description they'd given. Warren told the auction house that he was a relative of a wealthy guy who owned some rare art and historical items passed down from his ancestors, and he'd sent Warren to get them appraised. Warren and Spencer went into the house and met one of the employees, who was the assistant to the person in charge of the place, who usually handled the appraisals of rare items or art. The employee told them the books they had were super valuable and confirmed that they were definitely originals. She asked where they came from, and Warren told her that his wealthy relative had inherited the books from his ancestors and wanted to get them appraised because he was planning to sell them in a private deal with a secret buyer. She was suspicious from the start, and their story didn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, she told them the person in charge of appraisals wasn't there right now and would be in tomorrow, so they couldn't get an official documented appraisal until then. They tried to convince her, saying their client was in a hurry and needed the appraisal quickly. They asked if there was any way to get it done now, but the employee said, unfortunately, issuing an official stamped appraisal wasn't in her power, and the person in charge was the only one who could do that. She asked them to leave their number so she could contact them when the appraiser arrived. Warren and Spencer gave her the number of the hotel they were staying at and told her they'd come back tomorrow, then took the books with them. When they got back to the car, a heated argument broke out between them, especially between Warren and Chaz, and it turned into a full-blown fight. Chaz was scared that if they came back tomorrow, the news might have spread, and they'd get caught, maybe even by the FBI waiting for them. In the end, all 4 agreed that going back was too risky, so they decided to forget about the appraisal and certification, head home, and wait for things to cool down before figuring out how to sell the books later. Right now, it wasn't worth the risk. All 4 went back home, and things stayed like that for a while, with the books still in their possession. The FBI had taken over the case and started their investigation, but they didn't have much evidence. There were fingerprints found in the library room, but they didn't know who they belonged to. Warren and Eric didn't have criminal records, so their prints weren't in the system. Days passed, and the 4 friends started feeling more relaxed, thinking they were in the clear and wouldn't get caught. But suddenly, one night, FBI agents raided all their houses at the same time. Spencer, Warren, Eric, and Chaz were all arrested for stealing the books, and soon their real faces were all over the news. The big question was, how did the FBI figure out who they were? The main piece of evidence that revealed their identities was the email Warren used. Warren used the same email to contact both the library and the auction house. After the news about the stolen books spread, the auction house informed the FBI that two men had come in asking for an appraisal of the stolen books. The FBI then checked the emails sent to both the auction house and the library, and they were all from the same email account, which was linked to a Yahoo account in Warren's name. That was the big mistake. Warren had used his real name on the account he used to email the library and the auction house. On top of that, the FBI got surveillance footage from the auction house, and the images of Warren and Spencer were clear. The FBI was able to connect the dots and arrest the rest of the crew using phone records, since all four had used their real numbers, which were registered in their names, to communicate with each other. So it was easy to link them all together. In the end, all the precautions the four had taken fell apart, and they got busted. Their arrest was a huge shock to their families, who had no idea their kids were capable of something like this. The four were tried, and the judge sentenced them all to 7 years in prison. Warren was supposed to get a longer sentence since he was the leader, but the other three refused to cooperate with the investigation and refused to let Warren take the full blame. Because of that, they all got the same sentence. They served their full terms, and it was a rough time. Imagine being locked up for 7 years in your early 20s. In the end, after getting out of prison, each of them tried to make something of their lives. Spencer became an artist, painting pictures. Warren went back to school to study filmmaking. Eric is trying to become a writer, and Chaz became a fitness coach. They're all trying to move past that dark chapter in their lives. And that's the end of our story. As always, don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. You can also check out the previous story. It's a great one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.